found myself falling into a bit of a bad habit here for the past couple of weeks on this program, and I'm aiming hard to break that habit beginning today. Good morning to you. Good Tuesday morning. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports. This is Daily Shot of Penguins. It comes your way bright and early every weekday. If you're into football and or baseball, I also offer daily shots of Steelers and Pirates in the same place that you found this. The Stanley Cup playoffs are going to be the goal for the 2025-26 NHL season, meaning for the local franchise, meaning not an oversell here. I'm not suggesting anybody's going to be contending, meaning not an undersell either, because the notion that this team is somehow not just heading toward being a lottery level roster, but even trying to be a lottery level roster is so preposterous that I can't believe that it legitimately seems to be the prevailing opinion, meaning that they weren't all that far away from the playoffs the last time we saw them. Hear me out. Hear me out. I realize I'm swimming upstream here on this one, okay? I get that. I get that perception is a very difficult thing to combat. And the perception that the Penguins were entering this particular offseason ready to sell off for parts has yet to be hit hard enough in the face with the reality that they did no such thing. If anything, the handful of moves that they made, none of them being really all that significant, made the team a little bit better than it was at the end of last season. So pressing pause right there. If you've got anything to say to me about this specific stance, I don't want to hear a blessed syllable until you can tell me where the Penguins got worse since the end of last season, and what would have you thinking less of the team this fall and winter than what you just saw this past fall and winter. But I could also save you the trouble, because you're not going to be able to find that, because it doesn't exist. I have spoken many, many times in recent weeks that the Penguins finished on a 10-5-2 roll, and immediately the cynics, the people who actually want this team to suck for either some insane reason or some fantasy thing that they think that's going to get the Penguins magically closer to Gavin McKenna, because that's the only way you could ever build a real contender, they'll come back with, oh, but they were playing out the string, or the other teams weren't taking the game seriously. When I've gone through line item style, game by game by game, and shown you that one team, that was Dallas, down there, played their backup goaltender against the Penguins. That was Casey DeSmith. And one team, and only one team, went through the motions in any of those games, and that was Washington in the very last regular season game. Otherwise, the Penguins just played pretty good hockey. They weren't great. They were pretty good. And overall, they finished 34, 36, and 12 for 80 points in a season that began, for a variety of reasons, with some of the worst goaltending and defending that we'd seen around here in 40 years. That eventually got a little bit squared away, not all the way, but a little bit. And after the horrific start, they were pretty much just a little bit better than a 500 team. Even with that, 80 points, and 7th in the wild card standings that only take the top 2 teams. 11 points behind the final playoff qualifier, the Canadiens. 11 points. The Penguins, you might recall, lost 12 points to the stupid overtime and shootout. Only Vancouver and Utah lost more. The Penguins were terrible at these. Now, maybe they'll continue to be terrible, but NHL history has shown us that overtimes, and to a larger extent, I should say, shootouts, aren't really all that reflective of how good a team is. Otherwise, the Blue Jackets would have been your Stanley Cup champs. They went 6-1 in shootouts. I'll stick this in parentheses just for fun, but the Panthers, who actually were the Stanley Cup champs, were 6-0 in shootouts. My point still stands, end parentheses. So why am I saying this stuff that those of you who've been with me for a while have already heard several times? It's for this reason. My intent, my own, not speaking for anybody else, not expecting anybody else to be along for the ride, is to enter the 2025-26 NHL season covering these Penguins in person, in the locker room, on the road, just like I've always done, from the prism of expectation that the goal for the season is the Stanley Cup playoffs. I am not going to cover them as if they are rebuilding or reloading, even though there will be elements of that worked into what they're doing. It's going to be about getting back to the playoffs. So you're going to hear a lot more discussion from me about, say, for example, who the top 6 should be on this team. Who'd be on the power play? Who's going to start in goal? How much of a chance do you give to an Artur Silovs, for example? Do you weigh anything in his advantage or to Tristan Jarry's advantage based on either of their relative positions within the whole rebuild/reload? That's something that directly impacts the NHL roster and, in turn, the goal of making the Stanley Cup playoffs in 2026. I'm not real big on predictions, but I'll make one for you here right now that I feel is pretty safe. When I get to Cranberry in mid-September and training camp opens, and that locker room opens for the first time to media, I could go through that entire horseshoe shape of that room and interview every single NHL level player in there, and they're all going to agree on that solitary subject. It's going to be their goal to make the Stanley Cup playoffs. It's my belief that that goal only enhances this team's drive to resume real contention. Everyone gets better in a winning atmosphere. Everyone's development is accelerated in a winning atmosphere. Keep bringing in youth. Keep getting draft picks. Keep using those draft picks. Keep doing a good job of developing those draft picks. Keep pumping them into the machine. But make sure that machine is humming. When we come back, J1Q. This episode is brought to you by Bet Online, your number one source for all your summer sports needs this season, from Major League Baseball, golf, NHL, NBA playoffs. Get the latest odds and lines, including all team matchups, player props, odds on just about everything that's out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Bet Online, where the game starts. Today's J1Q comes from John, who says, DK, I was wondering what you would think of moving Gino into a wing spot and letting Tommy Novak potentially take some minutes as the number 2 center. Now that Mike Sullivan isn't coach, Dan Muse might be more willing to let a winger hang back as F3 like Gino and let Novak, forecheck a tad more. I feel like taking some of the defensive strain of playing center might give Gino more quality minutes. John, you're not going to ask a 39-year-old Leopard to change its spots. And if you are, you're wasting all of the potential assets that Leopard could offer you, because that Leopard's been a Leopard the entire time. And let me tell you why I let out a little bit of a laugh. It wasn't disrespectful, but when you brought up Gino being the guy who would be hanging back as F3, that's not him. And I don't think it's fair 2 decades into his career to him or to the Penguins to say, hey, we want you to try something completely different, Gino. It's not workable from any perspective. If you noticed one thing and appreciated Gino for what he's done over the past 3 seasons, instead of just presuming that because he's old, he's all of a sudden gotten unproductive, cue this from the top of the mountain: 200 points in the past 3 seasons. That's reality. That's not perception. 200 points in the past 3 seasons, then you'll also know that he's been, for the most part, healthy. He's been an 82-game guy of late, and then he wasn't this past season, ran into a tough stretch down the stretch. My belief is that if that had come at a time where the Penguins were making some super crazy hard push, absolutely need this game or that game to get into the playoffs, you might have seen him hobbling around out there on the ice instead of being scratched. As it was, they let him heal. So it's not like he's worn down to the point of missing some huge chunk of games. It's also not as if when we've watched Gino at his best over this past season, we've thought to ourselves, wow, he just doesn't ever dominate a shift. He doesn't just take over anymore. I mean, you'd have to not be watching to have a thought like that even cross your mind. You'd have to be looking at nothing other than the birth date on the back of his hockey card. But, all that said, I love the idea of talking about who's going to be on the second line. John, of all the J1Qs that get sent this way, it's always something about this and that and rebuild and reload and throwing games and Gavin McKenna and everything else. What you're asking about is what we're actually going to be seeing this fall and winter. It's what's actually going to play out this fall and winter. So to attempt to answer that question in the spirit in which it was intended, what I gather is you just want to get a good sense for the lines, or at least second and third lines. I can see Novak, who does need to get some time in an offensive capacity, or he's not worth anything to you. I shouldn't say that. Not worth much to you. He's not a terrible defensive player. I have put forth that Novak could center a third line in which you could flank him with a couple of kids and say, hey, go get it. And Novak can turn a couple of those kids into guys who don't have to worry as much about their Mike Sullivan level responsibilities, if you're following me here, and just say instead of them, just go play hockey, do your best, get creative, get productive, skate your rear ends off. Now, what does that mean for Gino? I am of the mindset, though I won't forecast this, that Sid should stay between Brian Rust and Rickard Rakell, and that Gino could be on a line with Ville Koivunen, who he really liked in those final 10 games, as well as Anthony Mantha. That gives the Penguins a really nice NHL-type presence on their top 6. It gets at least one of the younger players involved. And look, if Rutger McGroarty shows real well, then he can be the one who takes Mantha's spot. That kind of stuff can be interchangeable. If your third line is Novak, McGroarty, Phil Tomasino, or if a younger player beats out Tomasino in some capacity, you've got what I think is a pretty nice mix of older and younger, from which you stack yourself up a fourth line that's got, the penalty killers on it. And if those PK guys come from the kids, okay, that's all right as well. The one thing they're all going to have in common, they're all going to be shooting for the playoffs. I appreciate the question. I appreciate everybody listening to Daily Shot of Penguins. And we'll be back with another one of these tomorrow.